the multifaceted issues around the PIA. We have the pleasure of the presence in our studios one more time, Mr. Mele Kolo-Kiare, his Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC. Mr. Kiare, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning, good to see you today.
Also here with us in the studios, would like to welcome a veteran of the oil and gas sector, Dr. Timothy Okon. He's a petroleum economist and currently managing partner of Tenno Energy Resources. And at some point in his career, he was a group executive director in the NNPC. Dr. Okon, delighted to have you with us on the program.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
And joining us via Zoom from the United States is Professor Yinka Omoregbe, Research Professor, Nigeria Institute of Advanced Legal Studies and President, Nigerian Association of Energy Economics. Glad to have you join us. Okay, I think she's not here now. So let me go to the next guest. He's also joining us via Zoom from Asaba. He's Professor Joseph Abugo San, Professor of Commercial and Industrial Law, University of Lagos. You're welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
All right, gentlemen, once again, a pleasure to have you join us for today's conversation. Let's just begin by taking a general look at the PIA. This is a law that has come with a great deal of expectations, long in coming, and now we have it. So what does this mean to you, GMD of NNPC? Is this a breather, or it's the commencement of even more arduous work?
Thank you very much. I think it's for the whole industry, not just me. It is a big relief for the oil and gas industry globally, not just in this country. Our industry got stagnated because of lack of clarity around our fiscal environment, around our regulatory framework, and also the very fact that the current laws that we are executing in the industry are very, very stale, very, very archaic, in the sense that the Petroleum Act itself is Petroleum Act 1969. There hasn't been any significant change to the provisions of the Petroleum Act. Yes, there were several amendments and some regulations that are put in place to support the Petroleum Act, but in essence, what they all did is to probably, to say the least, not adequate to bring change to our industry. So ultimately, we stagnated. Investment got stalled into our industry as a country, and ultimately our partners and investors decided to practically quit our country. And that's simply because there isn't a clement fiscal environment. We are not very competitive. We haven't moved with time, and the society, particularly the petroleum industry, has changed. It has become a much modern industry, and we got stuck. So having the Petroleum Industry Act in place today is simply a jump from what we know, which is completely archaic, to a very, very modern oil and gas industry. The world was waiting for this. The whole industry is waiting for this situation to come on board. So definitely for us as players in this industry, that we know that this is change that has come, that has eluded us for very, very many years, and I think it's a very, very good omen for our country and the industry.
Indeed, great expectations there. Dr. Okon, as a player in the industry, you've been there for quite a long time. It's quite an exciting experience for this bill to be passed, and it's now a law. What are your expectations?
Thank you. I think first and foremost, we are having some stability in the fiscal framework. I think, like the GMD is pointing out, it's flexible, so it recognizes what existed in the past and what needs to exist in the future. So there is optionality, and the optionality is simply that if you choose to remain with what you have, you are at liberty to do so. But if you choose to respond to the significant incentives that the fiscal system offers, then you will be under a new framework and new rules. The second point I would say is simply the recognition of the midstream. So this legislation has a proper regulatory framework over the midstream. So you have the midstream and downstream authority, for example. So that will clarify many issues with regards to gas and how you need to monetize that gas, especially domestically. if you want to grow our GDP, then now we need to begin to process hydrocarbons at home. And I think that's very important. So you will have a regulatory framework that enables that activity. It's someone that would oversee. The third component is simply the national oil company now. In Section 53, you see clearly stated objectives, that it will be commercial, it needs to be profitable, fit for purpose type of organization. So it's a limited liability company. And since now in the law, definitely it says clearly that it needs to be these, so it will respond to the incentives that it's been granted, and will go out there to compete and do commercial deals that will reflect a benefit not only to the company itself, but broadly to the generality of the Nigerian people.
Thank you, Dr. Kohn. Let's bring in Professor Joseph Abugu, learned senior advocate of Nigeria and professor of commercial and industrial law. You're an author of several publications and books on corporate law. We do know that one of the key provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act is the transition of the NNPC from a statutory corporation to a limited liability company. In your opinion, what are the potential pitfalls or the likely issues that we all should be apprised of in this course of transition?
Thank you, Kingsley. Gentlemen, Nigerians, good morning. First, I want to join all those who have commended the National Assembly and the federal government in bringing to fruition the Petroleum Industry Act after such a long time being in the offing. But going forward, as you have pointed out, the federal government has put in place an implementation committee. What are the challenges or potential issues that should arise? I want to look at that against the background of what should be our expectations or overall objectives. The implementation as conceived under the Act, the success of it or otherwise will be dependent on whether the PIA has addressed a number of issues. One of them is to examine whether the Act as it is presently is a potential panacea for the effective management of the petroleum industry, vis-a-vis the structures that it has put in place. The second one will be whether the Act is also a panacea for ensuring the development of the oil-producing states, whether it will inure towards the peace in this particular sector. Now, these are issues, some of them the Act has addressed, some of them there is a dearth of provision for them. Taking the NNPC, for example, the transition from a federal regulatory authority to an economic-driven entity has implications for the entire industry. Well, it brings the NNPC into the competitive arena so that it can compete with all other companies in the country. It brings the NNPC within the regulatory purview of the Corporate Affairs Commission, as it is going to be registered under the Companies and Allied Matters Act. So provisions of the Companies and Allied Matters Act that otherwise applies to all other companies with respect to concurrent reporting responsibilities, with respect to resolutions and changes in board composition, if there is any, with respect to filing, annual accounts and all of that, with respect to appointment of auditors, and indeed, the new corporate governance regime would therefore be applicable to the NNPC as a corporate commercial entity. That is a welcome development. With respect to the agencies that have been set up by the Act, a lot is still to be desired. We look at a situation where the the implementation committee will actualize the composition of these committees. But you can see that in terms of composition, both the upstream regulatory commission and the midstream and downstream regulatory authority, in terms of composition, they're actually on the same pedestal. The individuals that will comprise these bodies are well atomized by the statute. And so we need to see whether that composition will inure towards an effective regulation of the industry. I, for one, I have noticed quite a number of deficiencies in the composition, but certainly that is not for the implementation committee. We hope that at some point, as many have admitted, there will be opportunities to fine-tune the provisions of the Act, not only in terms of composition of the various agencies, but for the effective implementation of the overall objectives of the PIA.
Thank you. It's actually work in progress. GMD Melekiari, a timeline has been set for the implementation of the PIA, a 2-year plan, which is for the incorporation of the NNPC, establishment of a regulatory authorities, and creation of host communities trust fund. Tell me, how is this going to play out?
I think the PIA is very clear on timelines when you have to deliver on these provisions. First of all, let me be specific. On the NNPC establishment of NNPC PLC, the law is very clear that within 6 months, the Minister of Petroleum and the Minister of Finance will cause for the incorporation of the NNPC PLC. That means that the furthest you can go without incorporating the NNPC is 6 months. And so also a number of timelines have been set for the other agencies that need to be established so that the bill can run its full course. So definitely the time frame that the committee has taken for itself, which is to be completely effective in 1 year, and of course deliver completely within 2 years. There may be no need for making it to 2 years because it's very obvious that the law has set off a framework that will make it impossible for you to stay that long. What I think will happen is that as we migrate from where we are today to the new situation, mind you that many of the functions that you're seeing, both in the NNPC and the other regulations, actually many of them are existing today. It's a refinement of those processes, rearranging some of the portfolios that we're managing, both as regulatory institutions and both as commercial entities. And for instance, if you come back to the NNPC today, you have a corporation that is operating under the NNPC Act. What's different from a company under CAMA is that there are some requirements that are not in the NNPC Act. Therefore, as you move into the CAMA company, you end up implementing some of these things. But it doesn't mean that this company doesn't exist. So you will transform from a corporation into a commercial company governed under the... so that means there's an existing framework that you need to migrate. Of course, the law has made provisions where assets are defined, transfer of certain assets that currently are under the Federation, that now come to the NNPC, some assets that the corporation is keeping in trust for the Federation that will now have to move to outside the NNPC. And several of these things are clearly very simple to implement, and the lines to be drawn are very, very precise. And I don't see any challenge, getting this done. So the timelines are clearly, they appear stretched, but I believe very strongly that within a year we will have an industry that is running on the terms of the PIA.
Well, GMD, your optimism is to be applauded. But what we do know from our national experience is that oftentimes getting from the code print of policy into implementation provides its own challenges, because there are sometimes external factors that might impede the work of the implementers of a policy or a program or a piece of legislation. And as important as the PIA is, which is why we are discussing it, well, let's tell us, what is the outlook of the implementation committee? I know that out there's a mistaken impression that, oh, within 1 year, everything in the PIA will be implemented. I mean, whereas it is, I mean, presumably, the implementation committee is to provide the wheels and then the oil and fuel for the PIA to now begin to run. What is the outlook of the implementation committee itself, and what does it seek to achieve?
Yes, thank you, Kinsley. You know, the oil and gas industry is a globally regulated industry. It has its local coloration, which means, you know, you adjust your industry to meet the realities of your local environment. What this means is that 70% of what you do in the oil and gas industry has clear international coloration. And of course, but in practice, you know, you find yourself doing exactly what is done in very many countries and what is done in very many resource-dependent countries. So what I see is that getting this done, you know, because of the clear provisions in the PIA around timelines, around what should be done, who should be where, there will be you won't find those difficulties that you typically see when, you know, policies of government are put in place. This is no longer policy now. This is the law, and the law is very clear on how things will be done, who will do it, when it will be done, and therefore any act that kind of takes you out of that timeline or that process means, you know, it's a breach of the law. So you don't have such in certain policies. That is why sometimes you have this difficulty getting things implemented. And by the way, if you look at the composition of the implementation committee, you know, it is drawn from very many institutions of government that are clearly involved in financing, in planning, in taxation, and definitely, you know, when you have this crop of people working as in the steering committee, and then also you have those clear sub-level of the implementation committee that recognizes legal framework, recognizes the need to communicate with the stakeholders, recognizes the need for us to get this thing speedily done and plan appropriately. I do not see any such challenge and worries around whether or not this implementation will take place. I think this will work. I believe very strongly that, you know, this is history that will be made. This country and all of us will benefit from what will come out of the implementation of PIA. And I strongly believe that I don't see those challenges that you typically see around worries around implementation.
I think the worry is, I will stay with you briefly before we go to the other guests, is state governors are crying over the 30% frontier fund. So with the combination of all these worries, how is this supposed to work out for them? What set of committees in the state I've read from the newspapers this morning?
I think we haven't communicated enough. For instance, as we progress with the process of putting the PIN in place, maybe we haven't communicated enough. If we have done so, some of these misgivings wouldn't have come up in the first instance. You know? I know there were engagements, but maybe they are not effective. For instance, when you say 30% of profit oil from NNPC share or profit oil from the PS, it's a very small number. You know, the percentages are very, very, they appear very outrageous, but 30% of what? You know, that's nobody has sat down to look at this. When you say profit oil 30%, it probably comes down to less than $400 million in per annum. And then the other side of it is that now 30% is big number, but when you come to the host community fund, you know, you have 3% of our operating expense. We spent about $16 billion in fiscal 2020 in our operating expense across the industry, $16 billion. So when you take 3% of that number, it comes very above $500 million, you know, far above the budget of NDDC. You can see that the numbers don't reflect, those percentages don't reflect the realities that we are trying to achieve by this. And for profit oil, for instance, you know, there are a lot of uncertainties around profit oil. If you don't make profit oil, it's zero. But you must spend money to do operating expense, so that we are very sure that the provisions that it made for the host communities will be implemented, will be delivered. But then when you even come to frontier exploration, that is an issue. What's the frontier? You know, there's this common understanding in the wider space that when you say frontier, you mean northern Nigeria. Absolutely not. You know, frontier is a very, very technical word. It means where you haven't found oil, where there's potential for finding oil. This spreads across the country, from the Chad Basin, Sokoto Basin, the Bida Basin, the Anambra platform, the Calabar embankment, including the ultra-deep water Niger Delta, which has not been explored. So every money that you have to put it into this on the basis of their prospectivity. And what's wrong in finding more oil in anywhere that you find it? Because once you find oil or gas, it becomes the resource of the federation. And therefore, nobody loses from this participation. And I can understand the worries about the Governors Forum, which you alluded to. What is very sure is that once you have a very clement fiscal environment where investors can see a line of sight around when they can invest, when they can recover from their investment and the margins they can make, you will see volume will increase. Yes, short term, you can see immediate changes to revenue framework. But what will happen is that there will be more activities. More activities mean that even the subnationals will have opportunity to have pay as you earn taxes and all kinds of things that come up as you expand the industry, as opportunities grow, as you are able to put in more gas into the domestic market, more industries are created, more prosperity is created, and therefore you have more people to tax. Short term, yes, but in the long term, we see that this bill will promise a lot of prosperity for our country, and I see no worry around it. Even for the short term, we are very conscious of this as we progress through the PIA process. We knew that immediate revenue is very essential for the federation, and particularly for the state government and the local governments. Therefore, there are preservations in the law that put cap on how much of cost that you can recover immediately, and therefore, substantially, most of the revenues that we see today will be sustained. And of course, in the short term, probably in the 2-3 years' time, that you'll see a number of activities that will come up, and then everybody will say that, yes, we did a good job out of this.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Dr. Timokol, I would like you to comment further on the aspect regarding to stakeholder engagement, with particular reference to the experts who say misconception around the budgeting in the Act for frontier exploration. Are the people getting it wrong, or are they getting it right?
Okay, I think you said I should comment on stakeholder engagement. I think we did do some sensitivity analysis actually in the committee that was actually looking at this, and I think GMD is right, because if you look at the frontier basins, it starts from the far north to the far south, and the Calabar embayment and all of that, the Dahomey Basin and so on and so forth. So broadly, I think the stakeholder engagement, we obviously, because of the questions that have arisen, that I think now is the time to actually go to town on that. But I want to emphasize, like GMD has also said, I think there are many things that affect profit oil, and if the price of oil goes up, profit oil can go up. But if you are investing, profit oil is the last thing that you get at the tail end. The basis for which you compute the operating costs is different from the basis which you are computing the profit oil. Profit oil is at the very end. If you don't make profit, then there is nothing. Okay, the second thing I would say with regards to the whole profit oil debate is that has to be appropriated. This is not somebody's pocket money somewhere. You still have to go to the National Assembly. If you look at the law simply says that money will be set aside, but you have to still go to the National Assembly to appropriate any monies that you are spending for that particular activity. Compare that to the 3% host community is part of the business that you do essentially, and 3% of the operating expenses, wherever it is, it's part of what you do in your OML. So it's the operator that actually makes provision for that, and that is part of running. Except, of course, you've depleted the reserves. Then, of course, you shut down operations. Then those funds no longer become available. There is greater certainty in the 3% of the operating expenses than there is in whether you are going to get the profit oil. Yes, the 30% of the profit oil. And if you do the maths, it comes in at about the same anyway. But this has to be spread along. And you have to, of course, evaluate, like in the ultra deep, those are the areas in which potentially people are going to be looking at, especially the international oil companies. The inland basins may not be as, even though there is a lot of gas potential in many parts of the inland basin. So.
No, but tell us something about the frontiers in terms of the geolocation. Because the GMD tried to speak to that a while ago.
Okay.
Again, out there, I mean,
Yes, okay.
That's right.
That's right. So most of our oil comes from the Niger Delta. So let's start with the Niger Delta. That is known. Then as you go towards north of the Niger Delta, you hit the Anambra Basin. The Anambra Basin is the beginning of the Benue Trough, so to speak. So when you go from Anambra to the Benue Trough, then you have the Benue Trough goes northeastwards. That's where you have the Benue River. Anyway, but after a while, you have the Gongola Basin. The Gongola Basin is actually a failed trough. So that's where we've had this the latest well that NNPC drilled, etc. So it's a failed rift system, but so there's potential there as well. So actually, if you're looking in terms of potential, you're in the Niger Delta, then you go to the Anambra Basin, the Benue Trough, then the Gongola. So you start from the known, and then you go northwards. There are quite some blocks actually in the Anambra Basin. That is probably the natural where you are going to find a lot of gas. I can mention some oil prospecting licenses, but it's not my duty to do that here. But I see the potential. So as you move on, geology, and it's a petroleum geology, is on a grand scale. It doesn't confine itself to specific states or that sort of a thing. The way in which oil formed years and years ago, it doesn't confine itself to our local politics. So it generally would go, and since you have the Niger Delta as you go for, then of course in the ultra deep, offshore Lagos and some of the things that have been that are prospective. So all of those will be looked at, and this is available for. And I do not think, and GMD is here, I do not think that the NNPC will want to do 100% deals in when you're doing exploration, etc. You minimize your risk. So it's not as if that you would want to exclusively, you want to be in some partnerships and so on and so forth. So those things would work themselves out. And of course, the definition of the frontier basin is also subject to regulation. So the thing that we haven't mentioned here is that when you pass the law, the detailed workings will now come in form of regulation. So a frontier basin is defined in the law, but the commission can vary that definition through regulation. So if in the future you find that there is something happening somewhere, okay, and it's frontier, by regulation you can the law provides a basis for which the frontier basins can be expanded. Okay, so that is covered.
Yes. Okay, let's now join Professor Abugu. Signed, sealed, and delivered, but with some rumblings in some quarters, actually. So what kind of revolution do you expect from the oil and gas industry with the implementation of this act now? What is going to play out in the Niger Delta and across the country?
Thank you very much. With respect to implementation, I'm a little bit worried about the implementation of the provisions of the PIA with respect to the development of host communities. We must not lose sight of the fact that peace in the Niger Delta hosting communities has been a continuing challenge for the petroleum industry. It is expected that the PIA would substantially address the issue of stability in that region for continuous exploration and production of oil and mineral oils, including gas. Now, the provisions of the Act as it is now, whilst it has set up the Host Communities Development Fund, sections 240 and 242 of the Act places the responsibility of constituting these development trust funds on the oil companies, the licensees. And from the provisions, it is possible that each license operating company would have to set up a community development fund, trust fund. There's provision, however, for 2 or more companies that are operating under the same license to be able to operate under one joint community development trust fund. And as the GMD can tell us, there are over 50 of such licensees. And we expect, therefore, that there's going to be a populated terrain of trust funds. And these are to be managed by the oil companies themselves. The PIA did not make provision for community representatives, host community representatives, NDDC representative, or oil producing state government representative in these trust funds. We only 2 days ago, we all listened to the Minister for Niger Delta Affairs, stating categorically that the oil companies are owing several billions of naira even to the NDDC fund, a federal government agency where they are statutorily charged to pay certain contributions. Now, if you look at that against the background of a trust fund that is being set up by the oil companies, they determine what their operating cost for the previous year had been. That would be the basis for charging them with 3% contribution to this trust fund. If they are owing the NDDC, what more do you expect from a trust fund established by them, constituted by them, for the benefit of the host communities, with little or no participation, at least statutorily? Maybe administratively, the implementation committee will do something about that. But as it is, the development of the host communities under the PIA is left at the behest of the operating oil companies. And that could pose a challenge to the peace and the peace of the oil industry, particularly, at that level, at the host community levels. In addition to that, the Act also provides that host communities will not benefit from developmental projects to be sponsored under the trust fund if there has been a damage to an oil facility within their enclave. It didn't say that that destruction or damage must have been proven to have been caused by members of that community. It could be caused by anyone. And even we have cases of ill-maintained pipelines and infrastructures that have occasioned great devastation ecologically by way of oils and gas spills in the Niger Delta. Now, what framework is there to ensure that communities are not blamed for disruptions in oil facilities that cannot be traced to them? All of this are within the purview to be determined, as it were, by the oil companies. So you then see that the PIA itself has constituted host communities as slaves of the oil companies, notwithstanding the fact that even the host community development fund, there is no contribution by the government to that fund. The government has simply, under the PIA, abdicated responsibilities for the development of the host communities and entrusted it to the oil companies. This is something that should be addressed by the implementation committee. The implementation committee should be able to reach out to companies that have existing oil prospecting and exploration licenses, including mining leases, and be able to harmonize structures for the implementation of the host community development fund. A situation where we're going to have more than, as it were, about 50 development funds set up by different companies is worrisome for the peace of the Niger Delta and host communities in particular.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph Abugu. And by the way, for the benefit of our viewers, Professor Abugu is also an Olorogun, that is a chief in the Niger Delta. So he's speaking on behalf of his people. But he's raised a number of very pertinent issues, and both Dr. Timothy Okon and Mr. Mele Kyari, GMD of NNPC, will respond to these issues. Let's begin with the GMD. Well, I mean, the HOSCOM provisions generated quite some debate while it was a bill in the National Assembly, and we saw the fisticuff on the floor of the committee of the House, when some HOSCOM reps, got into punches. What is all of this? I mean, you listen to what Professor Abugu said. Let's get your reaction, GMD.
So, thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the whole concept of host community was the creation of the executive. This government decided that the PIB must have a provision in the law where the fate of the host communities is taken back to the host communities themselves. With all respect to the professor, the host community fund is completely within the control of the host communities. It is not it's not a fund that is going to be managed by the oil companies. The oil companies set up of a host community is no longer true. What we have on ground today is that you are going to have a host community that will be funded from the operations of the oil companies. That's where the oil companies come into this. It is our responsibility to make sure that as government, as the regulatory institutions, will ensure that those host community funds are set up. There may be participation of external people in the board of the fund committee, but it must be made at least 70% by members of this committee. So it is not a community that is going to be run by the oil companies. Then secondly, in terms of funding, let us not lose sight of the fact that the data around how much you have spent in a year is no longer secret. The PIB has made it very, very clear that you must disclose your operations, and by virtue of the provisions of the taxation process in the PIB, you must disclose all your spending for the purpose of taxation to the Federal Inland Revenue Services and also to the Commission. And therefore, your cost of operation is no longer secret. A simple number of a percentage is easy. Anyone can compute it. And coming back to the number of host communities that Professor is worried about, that is the key reason why the host community fund is created in the first instance, so that every community where the operation takes place, that is where the spills takes place, that is where the risks takes place, that those communities must have an established fund that will take care of their needs. So the number doesn't matter. As long as you are able to get the resources that is required, you have the structure that will deliver on this, and which is what, by regulation, the Commission can actually intervene to get all this sorted out. Lastly, let us not forget the very fact that every attempt in the past to ensure that development comes to the host community failed. Without any contradiction, Kesley, I can tell you that the 13% derivation was designed to make sure that development comes to the Niger Delta region, and by implication, it should come to the host communities. Secondly, you have the NDDC. The very design is to ensure that development comes to the Niger Delta region, and also by implication to the host communities. And there are very other interventions that are designed for the whole of the country. But essentially, when you look at it, the resources are coming from the oil and gas industry. It should impact on the host communities. But what we see today, which is why government thought that maybe let's just take this fate back to the host community themselves, who haven't done well generally, and therefore what can we do differently so that we can bring something else on the table. So this is an add-on to existing structure, which will also means they are complementing what is on ground. I know there are efforts that are going on to make sure that the existing structures deliver on what they are doing. Yes, My brother, distinguished Senator Akpaba, is doing very well, making sure that NDC delivers on its act and is in provision. But what this will do is that you will see manifest development in the host communities driven by them, by their own necessity, determined by them. For instance, today, when oil companies, including NNPC, when they go to communities, we'll just go and make one big hall for them, as we'll have a community hall. That's not what they want. That's not what they need. And very often, they are hardly consulted in making these decisions for them. At the end of it, you have structures that have no use for them, and ultimately, the value is not there, and they don't see part of this game in the industry. So what we have done through the PIA is to make sure that this role comes back to the host communities. They are in control of what they do. The resources are available. What is provided in the PIA is essentially matching and above the provision that is not for NDDC. And I think that very, very strongly believe that all of us in the industry see it positively. We think that this is a game changer for the host community. And of course, there are issues. Of course, no law is perfect. We know for sure that there are things that we can do differently. That's why there's a room, as Dr. Okon has said, there are room for you to bring on regulations to make sure that we perfect some of these concerns that Professor. But overall, I don't think we have done anything as good as this. Being I agree of this industry, I know what the host communities go through. There are villages or communities who may just be 200 meters away from a flow station. They will not have drinking water, potable water. There will be no hospitals. The schools are not operating, and so on and so forth. Yet, there are massive provision that we have made as an industry to make sure this works. Now, this won't happen because these communities will decide that we want water in our community. They will decide that they will need a hospital in their community. And because the funds will be available, it will be done. And coming back to the provisions around, there will be no allocation of resources whenever an oil facility is attacked. I think the professor got it wrong. What you spend, because once the facility goes down, obviously you're not going to be spending money, probably only for security, and therefore there will be no resources for you to do. That's really what it means, but that's what you can perfect. And of course, the community will now have a stake in the continuous operation of these assets. Today, they have no stake, unfortunately. The very reason that they don't have a stake is that we have failed as a system to make sure that those values that should have come from very many other interventions do get to them. I think this is changing, but more importantly, what the PIA will do is to consolidate those interventions and make it work for the community. I think there's a very positive development, Professor. I can tell you very clearly that, yes, you have misgivings. I understand this very, very clearly. But, of course, many of the things that he has raised are actually things that have been addressed by the PIA.
Okay. Dr. Okon?
I think I would echo that as well. It's the host community component of the PIA actually is a creature of necessity, basically. It's we have many entities, you mentioned NDDC and OMPADEC before it, et cetera, et cetera. So it is kind of democratizing the decision for what sorts of projects that are done, not in state capitals, but in the community itself and giving them resources. It sets certain rules. 70% of that expenditure would have to be on capital projects so that basically it's not wasted, etc. And the host communities will participate fully in these trusts. There is no case of having host communities excluded and then the oil companies themselves deciding to run it for them. They need the communities to take responsibilities for their fate. So it's actually the reverse. It's and the key thing is that the influence of the central government and of the state governments and because you have all these allocations, local government allocations, NDDC, you have what state governments get, you have derivation, etc. But we are left with a basic problem that you go to parts of the Niger Delta, it's a ghost. But there is a component we need to also point out here because this comes with the general flare program. We have also in the midstream when there is an infrastructure fund that those flare penalties will now go into. So this is to incentivize projects in the midstream. So, all the gas flares, et cetera, which affect the host community. Some of the most vociferous complaints that you have about flares and things like that, etc. When those projects come, and I think DPR is about to announce awards, etc., those projects would be commercially guaranteed through these funds, and we will be able to now address a key component of this through this particular system. So host communities will get, in addition, this support, but you have viable projects which will now lead to employment, etc. So I think it's the innovative approach is to use commercially sound principles, which is what will encourage sustainability, and not just handouts. We expect that when a gas flare project is done in the host community, that there will be a benefit for employment. People will now become stakeholders. A man who wakes up in the morning and goes to work will not have time to go and be blowing up a pipe, etc., because he sees this is ultimately in their own best interest. So it's innovative, and I commend it. And in fact, in the comments that we have received in the process of drafting this law, there were some external bodies that particularly pointed this out. The very fact that the penalty itself now goes to the community. It doesn't go into the general pool in which you just simply share. So we are now incentivizing behavior that would lead to commercial development and economic activity within the Niger Delta.
And the host community provision in the PIA, many provisions there do not purport to abrogate the NDDC.
No.
Nor does it purport, or nor do those provisions purport to amend the constitutional provision with regard to 13% derivation.
Absolutely not.
That's
this
correct?
Is in addition.
It's an add-on.
It's an add-on.
It's in addition to every other thing that exists in law.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just wondering, Professor Joseph Abugo, you listened to the responses by the GMB, NNPC, and Dr. Tim Okon. Some persons have also argued that, look, straight away, why do host community members not now begin to take a look at the provisions and then see the beneficial interest and how to maximize those interests? I mean, if you take the trust concept in law, the beneficiaries, of course, will be the host communities. How then can the host communities ensure that at the end of the day, they are able to truly democratize the projects or programs that will inure to them from the operation of the respective trust fund, especially as we also have a clear provision in the law that, look, the expenses on CAPEX, that's to say capital expenditures, should be at least 70%, so that you don't fritter it away on administrative and other recurrent costs.
No doubt, Kingsley. The concept of democratizing and bringing the development of the host communities to their level is a commendable one. I have no doubts about that. The issue is with respect to implementation. Now, if the Act, as it is, specifically provides that the board or trust of each community development fund is to be set up by the oil companies, and it provides that the operation will be at the instance of the oil companies, I think there is a problem there that needs to be addressed at the point of implementation. That's the issue I've just raised, that the whole essence of the fund as presently constituted, contribution is by the oil companies, constitution of the trust fund and the composition of the trustees of the fund is at the behest of the oil company. The determination and the time of payment or contribution to the fund is also under the control of the oil companies. There's something that is wrong there. So to be able to achieve its objective, therefore, at the point of implementation, since we can't immediately change that law, we need to put in place a mechanism that ensures, one, mandatorily, that every oil licensing prospecting company establishes that fund. Two, that the composition of that fund, because the Act did not provide, it only says that there should be a community representative. Now, at implementation level, we need to ensure that the trustees composing any of these trust funds are fairly representative of the communities, host communities that will be directly impacted by the activities and projects of the trust fund. Also, we also need a mechanism to ensure that the oil companies do actually contribute what they ought to contribute to this fund. We've just seen the case of the NDDC. If they can flagrantly, be in default of contributions to the NDDC, what mechanism by way of implementation do we have to ensure that they will contribute, not just throwing muscles into the fund, but contribute what they ought to contribute into the fund? So these are actually issues of implementation. Commendable it is that, if the people are actively involved, they will be able to identify projects that will impact positively, on their lives and their environment. Yes, that is commendable.
You've raised some issues, and as the program begins to wind down, the GMD Mele Kyari will be responding to these issues when we return from this break. Don't go away.
The center is purposely established in order to provide these services that are examinations, medical examinations, and investigations that were not provided for in Kano as well as the entire Northwest region. It's equipped with modern technological equipment in terms of radiological services. We have MRI 1.5 Tesla. We have digital X-ray as well as 4D ultrasound equipment. The importance of the center cannot be overemphasized. Just within 1 year, the center attended to thousands and numerous patients as well as medical examinations. NKDC is established in order also to provide these healthcare facilities as a discounted price.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Heartburn symptoms detected.
Quickly, follow me. Burning, peeling in the chest, and bitter taste are symptoms of heartburn. Here, try Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes, neutralizing excess acid, creating a protective barrier that lasts for up to 4 hours. Gaviscon Double Action. Long-lasting heartburn relief.
A new edition of TV Guide is out exclusively with Governor Simon Lalong of Plateau State.
Since assuming office, our rescue administration has pursued the path of peace and reconciliation and restored confidence among people of different ethnic, religious, and political persuasions. Peace is back on the plateau. We are building world-class infrastructure in roads and opening up opportunities for innovation.
The edition is a compendium of mind-blowing stories for your reading pleasure, ranging from entertainment, economy, sports, media, politics, family, and lots more. Pick up a copy and keep abreast with issues and trending features within our space. TV Guide, very incisive, very educative and compelling. Grab a copy at the vendor near you or any NTA station nationwide. TV Guide, your indispensable companion.
The Sports Parliament, your weekly sports program, is back to the studio every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. live on the Nigerian Television Authority, Africa's largest television network. Watch out for the parliamentarians with renewed vigor and zest. Mr. Speaker with his gavel to harmonize sports resolutions. Sports Parliament, a must-watch. Sports Parliament, the home of sports verdict. The highs have it.
You're welcome back. And Kingsley, during the break, you said you have a question.
Well, yes, I'd like us to return to the GMD and then talk about the structure, potential structure of the NNPC going forward. I need some clarification on this. As the NNPC is transitioning from a statutory corporation to a limited liability company, now there are some differences to bear in mind, because I heard you say this, I wasn't quite sure. Will the NNPC now be a private company, limited by shares, or will it be a publicly quoted company? That's one. Second leg will also be, NNPC today has a number of subsidiaries, and these subsidiaries themselves are they are corporate entities, as it were. What happens to these corporate entities? Will the NNPC Limited or NNPC PLC, because if it's a quoted company, it's different from if it's a private company, will the NNPC PLC or NNPC Limited be a holding company? What is the likely structure of the emerging NNPC as a commercial entity?
Thank you, Kingsley. First, it's a transition. When you set up the NNPC PLC, that means it's no longer a corporation that is bound under the NNPC Act to a company that will be managed under the Company and Allied Matters Act. The implication of this is that this company will have shareholders, and those shareholders, in the context of the PIA today, the 200 million Nigerians are the shareholders, mind you. So all of us, including yourself, are shareholders of this company. But we are represented by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Petroleum as representatives of the shareholders. So these shareholders can decide, the law provides that over time, we can decide to reduce the shareholding by all of us into some private shareholding. That means it can be floated subsequently as a company that is now quoted in the stock exchange. The intention at the very onset is not to go to that step, but there's a provision in the law that allows us ultimately to sell shares of this company ultimately. So once you have that situation, it means as of today, it's a company that is owned by all of us, held in trust by the Minister of Petroleum and the Minister of Finance. And therefore, this company will declare dividend to all of us through the normal channel that is there, which is that at the end of every year, companies declare dividend, and this dividend will be transferred into the Federation account. While this is going on, because it is now a limited liability company, it will be just another company in the space. It will pay all obligations under the Petroleum Industry Act, which is that it will pay taxes, it will pay royalties as any other company will do. It will not wait for any dividend to come. Dividends come at the end of the month. There are clear provisions around hydrocarbon taxes, and what will come up also at the end of the year is the payment for income tax, just like any other company that will do it. But even when you do this, you still have a dividend to declare once you are able to make profit. So it's a very, very different ball game. And today's context, as you are aware, in 2018, I think it's very good to put it in context. In 2018, the losses of the corporation is about 803 billion naira. By 2019, by providence, we were able to reduce that losses to just 1.7 billion naira. And I can tell you, I've said it in very many fora, in fiscal 2020, this company will declare a net profit. So as we speak now, even as a corporation, this company has a potential to declare profit, has potential to declare dividends. So that means when you go to a proper karma company, there are many things that we do today that will be stripped off out of our responsibilities. Many of the cost areas that are currently being held by the corporation will no longer be our responsibility. And therefore, many, many things that would have probably contributed to some of the losses that we suffer will go away. Decisions will be completely commercial. You can't run any business under the karma rules continuously on losses basis. You'll be declared bankrupt under the KAMA rules. And for the subsidiaries, we have subsidiaries that are KAMA companies also. They are businesses that stand on their own. The NNPC PLC will be the holding company for all of it. It will consolidate its books at the end of every year as a company that is a holdco company. And of course, the individual companies will also be bound by the KAMA rules. It's nothing strange. This is best practice. It's done everywhere in the world. Our peers, Aramco, Petroleum, all of them hold this kind of companies within the holdco company. And I think it will be very exciting times.
So Nigerians, this is a new development because most Nigerians don't even know what the law or the act is. So a Nigerian can just buy shares in the NNPC?
Ultimately, yes. Yes, once we float it, when the shareholders decide to sell some of their shares, then the Nigerians can buy shares from the company ultimately, but not at the very initial stage.
There are no comments just yet from the subnational entities as to what their own stake might be in the NNPC.
Yeah, the stake is very simple. First, this company will pay taxes. This company pay royalties. Okay. Taxes and royalties are revenues that are accruable to the Federation. So every part of this country, every subnational institutions or governments will benefit from it as a first step. Then secondly, this company will pay the company income tax. Once you pay the company income tax, it also comes into the Federation and it is for the benefit of all. So what is different is that this company will now have profits to make. And when you make profit, you declare dividend, which will be decided by the board of directors of this company. Once you declare dividend, this dividend still goes back to the Federation because currently this company is owned by all of us. So anytime we decide to reduce the equity holding of all of us so that we can make some private capital into this business, then that proportion of the dividend will now go to those equity holders. So overall, it's a very, very different situation, Haji Hawa, because we have to go by the rules of KAMA. We don't have any situation where government will intervene in what we are doing or to supplement what we are doing because we're a business, and this business must produce results. Those results must be positive. If it is not positive, we get liquidated.
Okay, GMD, thank you very much. For some of our viewers, you've heard the GMD refer to KAMA. It's not that KAMA doesn't mean retribution. KAMA is C-A-M-A, which is the Companies and Allied Matters Act. That's what it's referring to. That's the broad law that governs corporations. That's to say companies that are incorporated under it. You also, of course, have the ISA, that's the Investment and Securities Act, governing companies that are quoted on the stock exchange. I know Professor Abuku may wish to comment on this subsequently, but there's a matter that I would like Dr. Tim Okon to also reference, because I've heard you raise some concerns at this at some other occasion, which is to say, how does the implementation, faithful implementation of the PIA enable us get into the very critical issue of energy transition?
Okay, yes, I think you probably have noticed that many companies are reforming and reshaping itself. There's a specific provision in the Act, Section 53, which says, notwithstanding any of these provisions, that NNPC will not have access to public funds. It is very clear in there. So NNPC itself will begin that adaptation process. What the law cannot do is to say NNPC must do 1, 2, 3 when you are in a dynamic situation. But the part of the reorganization of NNPC's business would be to begin to reshape itself like other oil companies have. You've heard Total talk about Total Energies and so on and so forth. So it will be in a position to reassess its portfolio, its assets, what sorts of assets it needs to hold. And of course, it will go to its board of directors and then get endorsement for this. But there are 3 levels of energy that you have to look at when you're looking at energy transition. There is the policy level, and that, of course, it's not the duty of a commercial entity. It will now be the office of the minister that has to now look at policy matters. So in terms of policy, what is Nigeria's response to energy transition? The framework for that transition usually, I hope will come from the Energy Commission of Nigeria. Okay, that part of their mandate is to advise the president on energy transition, and I think that should now preoccupy our attention. But NNPC's role today is that once you set up the limited liability company, it has to begin to adapt itself, working with its board, the board of directors, to reshape strategies for adapting to the new eventualities that will occur in the energy space. I said there are three levels. So the policy level, then of course what do you do with the assets that we currently have? And it's an important issue because clearly, if today you can use, for example, solar power to split water through an electrolyzer, and then you release hydrogen, which you can now use in a power plant. Even the gas age is under threat. So those are some of the issues in which we're going to have to look at what kinds of assets that you want to hold. And of course, with looking at, so there will be portfolio rationalization, etc. We are already seeing the third component of this. You're seeing what is our response technically to all the divestment, the announcements that are being made, etc. So those things would have to be looked at and worked at the policy level, at the operational level, where NNPC now would sit, and at the regulatory level within the regulators themselves. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me now go to the Prof. Prof, you've listened to them in the studio. We're running out of time. Let's have your final thoughts on the topic.
First, I want to say something about the NNPC Limited. The provisions of the PIA now, the NNPC Limited will be registered as a private limited liability company under CAMA. It is 100% owned by the ministry, will be 100% owned by the Ministry of Petroleum and the Ministry of Finance. And then its board is also statutorily set out by the provisions of the Act. So the idea that possibly it is going to be a public company and the shares of the company will be readily available to Nigerians to subscribe to is not an immediate dream. Because before that can be achieved, the Act itself will have to be amended to enable the NNPC, to enable the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Petroleum divest themselves and offer the shares they presently hold to members of the public. The provisions of the PIA with respect to the composition of the board of the NNPC Limited will also have to be addressed. So, just saying that the shares is going to be, the company will be public and then the shares will be sold to Nigerians is not an immediate conception within the PIA Act. Given that, I think the PIA is a step in the right direction in democratizing the oil industry. It may not be the best act that we can come out with at this time, but it is something to work with. We look forward to the implementation committee to be able to address some of the nuances of the act to enable it achieve its objectives. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be part of the discussion this morning.
Response, and then you round up.
Yeah. Yes. And in rounding up, Mr. Carey, I would like you to also speak very briefly to some of the issues relating to some of the entities that the law envisages would be fused or would be phased out. PEF, for instance, that's the Petroleum Equalization Fund, and PPPROA that used to fix the prices of petroleum products, with the very critical subtext issue of subsidy on refined petroleum products?
Yes, thank you. The law is very clear around which institution survives, which institution transits, and which institutions takes what role. And therefore, for instance, when you talk about petroleum pricing, you have the authority that will ultimately regulate the pricing of petroleum in the market. So there's a transition provision for all of these institutions, including the PEF, different timelines, but definitely not any one of them that will happen tomorrow. So as the implementation process that will bring them on board, it's very clear what must be done immediately. For instance, let me just face it promptly. In terms of pricing of PMS, which is probably the only regulated petroleum product that we have, the PIB envisages a fully deregulated market ultimately, but it didn't say that it will be done tomorrow. There are a number of steps that needs to be taken before we get to that position. In that context, you will see the relevance of all the regulatory institutions are clearly provided from the PIB, when they will be there and when they will exist. So on final note, I think I would like to join the professor to say that this is extremely a very positive development in our country and in the industry. It has brought our fiscal environment to probably one of the most competitive globally. It will bring investment into this country. We'll have a regulatory framework that will ensure that gas development is focused on, that we're able to develop our country, we're able to create prosperity in our country by creating more opportunities, creating more investment in our country. And ultimately, because this will win back the trust of the international business communities, particularly in the financing sector and the oil and gas sector, back into our country, will be the competitive environment of choice. For instance, it's clear that in the last 5 years, there are over $50 billion of investment in this country, which Mr. President has highlighted. And a part of that, less than $3 billion came into this country. And this trend will change. We are the biggest gas resource country in Africa. We have the highest volume of proven oil reserve in this country, yet we are not getting the investment. So business people don't care what you do. They make sure as long as your roads are good, your fiscal environment is good, they will come here. And of course, obviously, this is one of the best geological environment anyone can find in this country. And I think it's a good history. This has defied all logic. Getting the petroleum industry laws amended has defied all logic. And I think, with all humility, I will say that this government has done well, changing this story. And I congratulate Mr. President.
And I hope Nigerians will feel the impact of the PIA Act. Thank you so much. Mele Okolo Kyari, Group Managing Director of Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, NNPC, as usual. As always, your insight is appreciated. Thank you for coming on the program. Dr. Timothy Okon, Petroleum Economist and Managing Partner, Tenno Energy Resources. Thank you so much for your input on the program. And Dr. Professor Joseph Abugu San, Professor of Commercial and Industrial Law, University of Lagos. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Sports Update is next.
The Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games begins today with 22 athletes representing Nigeria at the Games. Nigeria will feature in powerlifting, para-athletics, para-table tennis and para-rowing, with the athletes hoping to surpass the country's best ever achievement at the Rio 2020 Games. Team Nigeria was 17th on the medal table with 8 gold, 2 silver and 2 bronze medals. Also, the Nigeria Table Tennis Federation has named Aruna Quadri, Funke Shunaike, and 10 other players for the 2021 African Senior Championships billed to hold in Cameroon. Quadri is joined in the men's team by Olajide Omotayo, Bode Abiodun, Aziz Sholanke, and Taiwo Mati. For the women's national under-21 champion Bukola Ajayi, national champion Fatima Bello, and Olympian Ofyong Edim have all been selected along with Funke Shunaike. The competition will hold September 1st to 7th in Yaoundé, Cameroon. It will serve as the qualifier for the 2021 ITTF World Championships scheduled for November in Houston, USA.
All right, thank you very much there for the sports update. Let's go back down to our foreign desk.
Officials in Kenya arrived at Jomo Kenyatta Airport in Nairobi on Monday to see the first donated doses of Moderna vaccines from the United States arrive, the first time the vaccine was received in the East African country. Principal Secretary at Kenya's Ministry of Health, Susan Mochache, said 880,460 doses were delivered. She added that the shipment is the first of 1.76 million doses donated by the U.S. government through the COVAX facility. The Moderna doses are set to boost Kenya's ongoing nationwide vaccination exercise, supporting the government's quest to get at least 10 million adult population vaccinated by December 25. Mochache also announced the increase of vaccination centers from the current 800 to 3,000 to offer one specific type of vaccine. Approximately 2.9% of the adult population in Kenya has since been fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, Suhail Shaheen, a member of the Taliban delegation in Doha, the capital of Qatar, said the Taliban will not agree to an extension of the evacuation mission from Afghanistan, warning of consequences. He said the move would mean extending occupation, and that is a red line. U.S. President Joe Biden had earlier noted that the hard and painful airlift of Americans and tens of thousands of others from Afghanistan's capital is accelerating, but he will not rule out extending it beyond the August 31 deadline he set before the Taliban's swift takeover. The airport has been the scene of chaos since the Taliban seized the Afghan capital on August 15 as U.S. and international forces tried to evacuate citizens and vulnerable Afghans.
All right, so that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We appreciate your tuning in. The program is back tomorrow, as always, same time, 7 in the morning. Until then, do take care of yourself. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Juma Yusuf. Don't forget to step up, be a star, join NT in the fight against rape and rapists. Do have a wonderful day.